Hi folks, welcome to April Fools. Nice warm day got going on here. And there we are. One of my subscribers from the reading his text, or her text, sounds like they're frustrated with a 250cc quad that they have. The wire harness is hacked up, and they asked me a question. They referred to one of my older videos, but they asked a question, you know, how do I bypass all the safety stuff and all that kind of stuff. So I happen to have a China quad back here. It's only 110 cc's. And I have that other China quad. What the hell did I do? Oh, that's in the shed. I guess we can look at that one also. Anyway, typically when you walk up to a quad or a three-wheeler or a two-wheeler, you have to, in your mind, separate out the electrical system. And you have to break into what each piece has to do with the electrical system, right? So, when you look at the motor, I mean, forget the spaghetti, right? Forget this. You know what all that is? That's scrap. That's just crap. Forget about it. The only thing you want to look at is, you see this wire coming out of the motor. You make sure there's only one. And you look at it and you take note of the colors of the various wires. The two yellow wires eventually go to your voltage regulator, and from your voltage regulator, that's what charges your battery. So that's, let's call it your battery part of the electrical system. You also have the ignition part of your electrical system. Okay? The ground wire, right there, the green one is ground. That's just hooked to the case, right? The metal case. And everything needs a reference. Whether you're the 12-volt part of the electrical system, those two yellow wires, or the part of the electrical system that does the ignition. So as you're looking at this harness, you already figured out 3 out of the 5 wires, right? 2 yellow has to do with charging the battery, running the lights, and the green is ground. What do we have left? You have blue and white and black and red, where this one is black and pink. If you go further where it didn't fade from the sun, it would be black and red. Blue and white actually runs a pulse generator, which tells your ignition system where the engine is, when is it ready for a spark, right? You don't just willy-dilly put a spark to an ignition system. At the minimum, it won't run. At the maximum, you'll fire it absolutely the wrong time, and you know, it'll kick back while you're trying to start it and break the starter, or you know, it just not healthy. So the blue and white gives you that, and the, once again, in this case, it's like black and white, black and pink. That guy there is how you power your ignition system. Most ignition systems on China bikes are copied from the Honda stuff, and that's your basic wiring diagram. If we take a quick walk over to the shed, some of them do the wiring slightly, do the coloring slightly different, but the pulse generator typically has a blue wire coming out of it. Typically green is ground, and typically from the engine, black and red. What did I do with that? It's over here. And I mean, more or less the same story on this guy. I don't want to dig it out. So now that I've told you that, let's take a look at the harness in such a way that it's easy to look at. I have a loose one here from a pit bike. You should recognize that. That's your CDI unit. And look at the world that the CDI unit will not provide you with spark unless the following conditions are met. Unless the CDI is happy, you're not getting any spark. Unless the CDI is happy, you're walking. So, obviously your CDI, blue and white, right, and ground goes to a pulsar. Here's your pulsar, right? I happened to tear that off a Honda and I just put it there to show you that that's where the pulsar goes, right? So blue and white, ground goes to the pulsar. Notice you got a whole bunch of grounds on this wire harness, right? Well, there's good reason for that. You got to hook a ground to the case. Typically, you got to hook a ground to the coil, and I was using this as a portable, so I would just hook a ground right to the outside, right to the case on this, right? I would just, clip it right on there. Make sure your grounds are good, by the way. Also coming out of the pulsar, in this case it's black and yellow, right? That slides on here, right? And I would hook one of these grounds right to here, if it stays. There you go. So now, and I would hook this ground right up to the case, right? So we're all happy, right? We have a pulsar that's nice and grounded. We have a spark that's nice and grounded. So that leaves you two more wires. This here, black and red, this needs to hook up to the stator, which provides power for the CDI box, right? You got blue and white is timing for the CDI box. Ground, everybody needs a reference. You got output from the CDI box, which eventually give you spark, but now you need power going into the CDI box. So black and red goes to the stator, right? And that puts AC power into the box, typically somewhere around 60 volts, give or take a foot and a half AC, and that's what makes this thing fire. Notice this guy here. Notice it's got no connections to it, but there's a couple of different places. This is your off switch wire, right? It is black and white. Also notice where it sits, right? You basically have the four corners of this plug being used. This is not in one of the four corners. So I went through a long story on telling you what to do. The first thing I would do is, if I got this unknown China bike and I was looking at a spaghetti nest, I would very quickly cut this off and make sure that it's floated. Floated means not hooked to ground, not hooked to 12 volts, not hooked to anything. I would cut it off and put a piece of tape on it so that you're sure the input to your CDI is floating, is not hooked to anything, is left all by itself, right? That's what you do with the black and white wire. Take note of the location just in case your colors are different, right? So cut that off, let it float. I would then give the thing a little huff of ether and see if she starts. A lot of times I put the 12 volt, I just tickle the starter directly with 12 volts. Like for this thing, if I wanted to start this thing, I would just put my battery pack, the positive lead here, the negative to ground, and then I use the switch on my battery pack to turn it over. If I didn't have a switch, I'd hooked up the positive lead and I would just touch ground to that. Well, that actuates your starter. So you got your starter going around, and hopefully by just cutting that black and white wire, the only wire that's not at a corner on your box, right? Hopefully by doing that, you'll have spark and it'll start. If you cut that and it doesn't start, now you got some questions you got to start asking, right? You got to start looking around to see where your problem is. Normally, I unplug the CDI jack and start looking to see what am I seeing. Normally, I put one side of my ohm meter to ground, right to the body, right? I scrape it into the motor. Then I check the green wire. Do I have virtually zero resistance? 0 ohms, 1 ohm, 2 ohm, 3 ohm, very low. If the answer is yes, I'm happy. If I then, once again, looking into the connector, and I start looking at my blue and white, which is typically my pulse generator, I'm expecting to see somewhere 30, 40, 50 ohms, something like that. Okay. This black and yellow goes into your coil. When I'm looking at that, God, I don't know. It's a primary on a coil, quite a bit of step up. I mean, it's typically low ohmage value also. I don't know, 50, 100, 25, 50, 100, something like that. It should be pretty low ohmage. And lastly, when I'm looking into the stator wire, once again, because I unplugged this and I'm probing the back of this thing, typically the stator is pretty low ohmage also. Typically, it should be, I don't have your bike in front of me, I don't have a schematic in front of me or anything like that, but just going off the top of my head, I would expect to see less than 50 ohms. One of the bikes that really threw me for a loop was a ATC 250 ES. And what they like to do is they like to get a lot of material. The stator actually goes into the hole of a flywheel. The flywheel is concave and the stator goes inside of it. And the magnets from the flywheel actually had a bunch of material that got on there. It was a starter gear that got chewed up that got on there, probably some transmission gear material. Anyway, you got a pretty tight tolerance between the stator and the flywheel magnets. So as it was going around, all that crap in there was just beating the heck out of the stator, right? Grinding it up and tearing it up, and eventually it really battered it, and it shorted some of the wires and cut some of the wires and all that. So here I am looking at it going, wow, I have the right resistance, or I guess the resistance was a little bit high for the stator, but I have something there, so you know what's going on. And I scratched my head and scratched my head, and eventually when I took it apart and I saw that the stator was completely abused, and I changed it, and I put it all back together again. I got her running. Anyway, I hope this helps. If you have any additional questions, let me know. The short answer to your question is, what would I do immediately? I would cut the black and white wire, the only wire that's not at one of the corners. I would just cut this off and tape it up, make sure it's floating, and give it a little hoot of ether and hope for the best. If that doesn't start it, then we might actually have to start talking about, what the back of your CDI looks like. Most of the CDIs that look similar, most of the stuff on the China stuff looks like this. It looks like your typical pit bike ignition, right? Most of them look like this. Some of them have the double plug, and if that's the case, we'll have to decode it out, and I'll tell you which wire to cut. It's probably, be honest with you, it's probably this. On this one, it's just black, right? This particular CDI is powered by 12 volts. And there's pluses and minuses to 12 volt powered ignitions. The nice thing about a 12 volt powered ignition, you can kind of take it and get yourself 8 AA batteries, which gives you the 12 volt, and builds your own little box like this. Typically the 12 volters, they seem to have a little stronger spark, especially if you have one of these high performance guys. You get a really nice spark out of them. So if you got a little bit of a loser motor, right, something that burns oil, or something that hasn't been started in a long time, or something that the carburetor is a little pooched on, the extra spark really could be the difference between it starting or not. Probably, given that you have a 250, the pulsar is fixed on the flywheel. It stays in one place, and the flywheel doesn't change timing. Your timing is electronic, right? The timing's built in. That's probably how it works. On probably 9 out of all the more modern engines, all the China stuff that I've seen. I've yet to see a China engine with mechanical advance. Not that that's a problem, but I have yet to see one with that. Anyway, let me know if this helps. I got a million videos out there. I'll just put up a fresh one each time I redo this troubleshooting video. I seem to do them a little better. So if you look at one of my old ones, it's more of a loser, and some of the new ones I've done a little better at explaining, and I don't screw up the phraseology as much. Anyway, I hope this helps. Folks, keep your feet down, keep your head up, and get out there and enjoy all your days. Make sure you have fun, laugh, run around, fall in the mud. Bye now, folks.